toxicology study, that's very simple because you can take a substance that you don't know how toxic it is and put it in an organism and then observe if it causes disease. But they don't even do that anymore. They instead take immune cells in a culture from some animal, add the toxin to those immune cells, and then if they make an inflammatory cytokine, then they say it has toxicity. But that doesn't, right? That could mean that if you actually gave it to the animal, they'd be fine, or it could mean that they'd be dead. Right? It's like, how do you, right? So it's like, they're not studying the thing.
Call a consensus, which is just another word for belief. Now, belief has nothing to do with real science. As a matter of fact, it thwarts real scientific progression for very evident reasons.
Grandiose self and the grandiose other. And, it's essentially, you could say it's a formulation when the ego is broken or split or fractured, and that a person borrows a grandiose ego either from a public figure.
Your body's attempt to heal itself, to regenerate, isn't actually healing you, but that it is a disease which you need to heal yourself from with my medicine or my vaccine. So people go on to take statins or antibiotics, and most of the time people become worse. They start vomiting and they experience more fever. And then they just tell you have another disease which requires different drugs.
Hello, and welcome to Medicamentum Authentica. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Kaufman. Today we have a returning guest, Alexander Raskovich, who you'll remember last time we talked about some of the methods of modern biology research, including Harold Hillman's work on electron microscopy. And Alexander has the YouTube channel Real Eyes Asian with EYE in the middle, and has some excellent material. And he's been really studying philosophy and science, and today we're going to talk about an interesting topic, and it starts with a word that you may or may not have heard before, but I want to give a little anecdote because my personal experience sort of led me to this topic many years ago when I was an entrepreneur and had a startup company. And one of my main mentors, Hank, every day when we would come in to have meetings about what are the next steps and follow up on what's going on, he would always say, okay, first we have to figure out what things are things. And this is really kind of the essence of the topic we're going to start on today, called epistemology. So welcome back, Alexander. How have you been?
Thank you so much, Andy, for having me on again. It's really a great honor to see you again. The last time we spoke, we had a very short window, and we spoke of many topics, and we had to, boil it down to the basics of all of it. So at least I'm very glad that we had it done. And it's really nice to have this opportunity with you again to speak of some of the topics we've spoke of before, like you've mentioned, epistemology and the Trivium method of truth discovery methodologies. Perhaps we could discuss some logical fallacies as well, and by which people can filter through many of the logical inconsistencies and things that just don't make sense within the general consensual things we've been taught thus far.
And what I think, we're really getting at here in this discussion is, what's the framework or the context when you want to start to understand how nature works, or when you start to want to look at scientific experiments and understand how you can interpret what you can from them, how you can reach valid logical conclusions, right? So we're kind of talking about the underlying philosophy of science. We're talking about what is knowledge and what is truth and things like that. And we're going to get into some of the philosophies or principles that really have led astray from reason and logic and caused a lot of confusion among people as to, how to evaluate what's true and what's not. And maybe, just starting with some definitions, what is truth and how do we apply epistemology to look at these issues?
Yeah, exactly. Truth. It has become, like you could say, a sort of bastardized term. Really, it really has got many, how you could say, guilt by associations in that sense. But really, because of many doctrines like the New Age doctrine and many others who promulgate the idea that truth is relative, that there is really no such thing as truth to discover. Really, that's probably the most dangerous thing you could ever believe from a foundational standpoint. We've spoke of the modern institutionalized education system, for instance, which is basically a synonym for the indoctrination system. And we also talked about the Prussian origin of it. But when you go to that area, you kind of discuss the foundation of things. So when you want to understand epistemology, you have to really look at it as a sort of foundation for the buildings that we've built thus far. So that everything, things like epistemological relativism, for instance, have promulgated the idea that everything of significance, such as freedom, morality, rights, truth, and all the other, really are all subjective and are nothing more than just vagaries of perception, most of them.
Right. And Alexander, when you're talking about this issue as that there's not really one objective truth or an absolute truth or a real truth, right? That it's all relative, and we're going to get into that. And I want you to define some terms first. But I'm reminded of the book 1984, where, people were convinced 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, right? And, we know from our experience that 1 and 1 always equals 2. We know that if we put a flame under a vessel of water, that it will boil, right? And these are examples we can always go back to because we can observe these in nature, repeat them ad infinitum. Other people can repeat it. And so we know that it's valid and just a truth. But we're in an era where the education system and other systems in our life, in our society, are starting to say that actually that's not the case, right? Actually, truth is what you make it,
Exactly.
right? That there isn't an objective truth. And, you hinted before we started recording that some people, even scientists, will say, oh, well, you can't really prove anything anyway. So we can just, essentially make it up.
Exactly. It's like you say, really, it's, I personally would say that those people are really devoid of the foundational, how you could say, the foundational principles from which you build to understand what is true. So we've discussed the Trivium, for instance. The Trivium really provides a foundational methodology. Well, the Trivium is part of a class like the seven liberal arts, and the Trivium is a part of it, but it's really also the start of it. So you begin by collecting the knowledge without really having any interpretations or opinions of it. You just take the information in without really prejudging it. And then you have to filter this information. So we are already going towards the step of actually applying our own judgment, intelligent judgment. And, to most people, because they are devoid of these methods of really discovering truth, as for the education system, for instance, people have become surrounded around the notion that, it's more about believing and it's more about feelings. It's not about what's true anymore. It's about how it makes you feel. This again can be, this can be seen in a lot of areas. It's about how it makes you feel. It will define your truth. But
right.
really,
Well, so Alexander, this has, obviously real world corollaries to what is going on in our situation right now. And, there's a dialogue between a group of us, doctors and scientists and journalists who have all looked at the evidence and say that there's no truth behind the claims about viruses causing disease. And we are trying to work with other people in the truth and freedom community to get them to look, at this issue. And one of them, who is a very prominent figure, responded basically, "I will look into this when more people have gone over to this side." So in other words, like, it'll be true if it's popular, but now it's not. I don't accept it as true.
Yeah, it's
right?
the bandwagon fallacy, right?
Exactly. And, the way it works is, whatever the consequences, whether you like it or not, what's true is true. If you planned a picnic today, but it's raining, you can't get around that.
Yeah.
You may still have fun and do something else, but you're not going to have a picnic in a sunny day when it's raining, and you can't interpret it otherwise without lying to yourself. And that's really kind of what people are expected to do, I think, is lie to themselves in order to avoid being confronted with an unpleasant situation or a conflict of interest or something like that creates cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, that's very true, and that's why many people become fall prey to many prominent logical fallacies. Things like appeal to authority, like we've discussed the last time. The thing that it can only be true if an self-proclaimed authority figure stated that it is true, that it's the case. So people don't really assess from a standpoint of, is it true, is it moral? No, they value things in terms of, has it been established, yes or no? Is it the established truth? Is it the consensus, in other words? Not is it true or is it moral? So that they are now being led astray by falling prey to these logical fallacies. And, if we just look at politics, for instance, they are very prominent. I mean, ad hominem fallacies galore, right? When it comes to people who deviate from the established norm, people who dissent from what is agreed to be the truth, where all the people who have fallen prey to the authority fallacy have gone to. And, people are being taught, like, the abuse of ad hominem, like the ad hominem fallacy has four categories, or it is a category of four, how could I explain it?
Levels?
Four levels of a ad hominem fallacy. So you have the abuse of ad hominem, for instance. This is where a person is directly attacked. So, for instance, they say that, if you're against vaccination, you are a how do they say that, a snake oil salesman, right? And you're not a doctor, so you can't be right. Or how can you give advice about marital problems if you haven't been married yourself? Attack the person, not the argument.
Yes.
And then you have, like, circumstantial ad hominem, which is like personal circumstances motivate a person's argument, therefore the argument is deemed to be false. So let's say, Andy, you sell something, right? You sell a book.
Yes.
You've made a beautiful book, and you would tell me, well, Alexander, why won't you read my book? You can get it on Amazon for like $20 or something. And I would go off on you, say, you only want me to read that book because you're the one who's selling it, But it's really not addressing the point, which is if I want to acquire knowledge, that is, if I want to acquire your erudition that you want to provide to me, then it doesn't disprove the claim that your book indeed contains some very positive, good, empowering erudition, knowledge.
Right.
So,
according to that theory, I would be more credible if I were destitute and homeless.
yeah. Exactly. Exactly, yeah. So really, that's why it's called a logical fallacy. It deviates from logic in the very sense of the word. So then you have something that is called, let me see, you have guilt by association. Now this is a beautiful one. Like, let's say this is just prominent all over the alternative media. When someone like me uses a symbol on my logo that is associated with something bad, they immediately associate me as being, they don't look at what I say, they just immediately attack me for using a symbol that they associate within the limits of their own interpretation. So let's use a more common, more colloquial example, one that perhaps let's start very simple. You think that 1 + 1 = 2, correct, Andy?
Yes, I believe so.
Well, you know who else had that viewpoint? Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin also believed that 1 + 1 = 2. So therefore, you shouldn't believe it. I very much promote veganism and doing less harm in the world in terms of what we've talked about in the previous series about, morality and applying the principles of natural law. And, people would often argue, well, the people behind the scenes and their mainstream media, they promote veganism. They literally go out and, try to denigrate meat consumption and try to get you to, eat all these, how they called meat replacers. I'm not a opponent of them, but they say that, because they promote veganism, therefore it can't be right to go vegan because they promote it. Or, various examples you can get out of this, when you just, but the point is, it doesn't disprove the claim that you're making if the truth about it is associated with something bad. It's not about association. It's about if it's true or not. It doesn't matter where it comes from.
Right. So, Alexander, it's actually, of course, it's definitely a mistake to use these in an argument, right? But also, when we evaluate information, we have to be aware of these biases might affect our perception as well, right? And the same way you're talking about, especially if, you see a lecture or read an article that contains interesting information, and then you see the same thing. You see an occult symbol on their website that's questionable, right? So how do you do that, right? Because it still could be. So now you may not trust the person. Maybe you don't want to develop a personal relationship with them based on that. But still, the information could be really good quality, even if it comes from the evil side, right? Like we get information from the World Economic Forum sometimes too. Right.
Exactly.
And because there's truth in the information, not because we trust the source. But also they tell us what they're going to do. So I always think don't throw out the baby with the bathwater when you're evaluating information. Of course, do proper due diligence and be, discerning in what information you regard as being factual or truthful. But don't, just ignore someone's information just because you have some other issue with them. And of course, if you're directly, having a discourse with someone about an issue, don't use these tactics because it just gets off topic. It makes you look bad. It doesn't advance the knowledge base or understanding base about the truth at all. And that, that's why really this is such a problem. And, now in the midst of this virus challenge, all of these people are coming out of the woodwork. And I think largely to kind of get some notoriety or some PR out of it. but they're journalists, not scientists for the most part, trying to say, oh, we want to debate. But the truth is that all the people coming forward don't have any interest in an honest scientific debate. They are just basically publishing articles and videos using all of these logic fallacies about the issue. And, some of them, it's pretty clear they don't even understand the argument that we're making about the scientific method and what's an independent variable, things like that. And so this all goes back, initially to this word epistemology that we started with. So can you give a definition to help the audience understand exactly what you mean by that term? And, because it has to be the first principle when you start looking at an issue involving any scientific experiments or data or truthful understanding.
Yeah, sure. Usually, I like to build from a foundation, and that's really the core of epistemology. So you have, let's look at the current situation, as you mentioned. We have two fractions of people. We have we have two opposing fractions. People would say there is the mainstream media and the alternative media. Well, when you come into the world, you can't really make sense of anything. You don't have the logical discernment in the sense of the word, right? You come into the world, you're trying to make sense of it. But instead of going to have to discover all of it over again, discover how gravity works, discover how all the physical laws of nature work, discover how linguistics work, etc. Therefore, we have a repository. We have a repository of information. And, the problem with that is there is really no rapport when it comes to that information. So you have, like I said, two fractions. This fraction says this, the other fraction says the other. So there is no rapport in that sense. So reliability, trusting a person to speak the truth based on logic fallacies, and like we've mentioned just before, is really going to lead you astray from actually discovering, from actually building intelligent judgment. And that's where epistemology comes in. Epistemology is really what has been the foundation for the buildings that we've built thus far. How do we know what we know? What has been, like the virus theory, for example, where those are mostly based on discoveries that have been done, the claims that have been made about viruses. This is going to cause contagion. This is going to cause this symptom, That's all based on mostly in vitro experiments. And in my video, I've gone through all of the methods of how viruses in particular are being seen under an electron microscope, and discovering and discussing all the preparation methods, really unveiling the dubiousness of the entire procedure of extrapolating something you see in there to an actual living human body. So there we go with in vitro versus in vivo. But the point
so the underlying then, framework that's accepted, right, as the epistemology in this example is the fact that what you do in a laboratory in a petri dish or a culture flask, right, actually represents the exact same thing going on in a living organism. Yeah. But there's simply no validation of the truth of that, assumption.
Exactly.
It's just something that they're told that this is the way it works.
Exactly. And that's, again, based on logic fallacies. So really the truth discovery methodology, is really looking at, well, how, like you said before, we basically know what basic things are true. I know that, I question, for instance, every day why I need to eat or drink, but eventually it becomes irrelevant to question it, because that's just a feature of reality. I am bound to it if I choose to live in this three-dimensional space-time continuum, or else I'll die. Or, I can choose to jump off a cliff. Well, then I die. So there are things that I know from a foundational standpoint, that's the truth. So really, it's comparable. I don't know if you've I don't know if you've read Alice in Wonderland. It's kind of extemporaneous, but when you read the first bit of Alice in Wonderland, when Alice has already tumbled down the rabbit hole, she's in this weird place, this weird hole with all the back doors in it, and she sees this table with this bottle on it, like that says "Drink me," and she's already applying the things she kind of knows from the inside. Well, she knows that, well, how do I know if it's going to poison me or not? So she knows that if you read that part, you can really see an allegory, a sort of metaphor, a metaphor as a depiction of what we're talking about here. Applying really addressing things from what you know, and then go and build up from there. I've heard Dr. Tom Cowan speak of this one time, when he said, like, I start from what I know. So I know that a human being has arms and legs. Well, then I go a little bit further. What goes beyond there? I can't see that. Why? Because many people would say what goes beyond arms and legs or the skin is, mostly cells and tissue. But Dr. Tom Cowan aptly explained that, well, the foundation for that is what we've mentioned before, the in vitro experiments that really have no validation. It's something that is outside of the body when it has been taken out of the living body, because it once was an integral part of a living system, and now you've removed it, so you can't correlate the two.
No, it's pretty amazing to kind of realize that no one has ever seen a living cell in an intact organism.
Exactly. Yeah.
But as you were talking, the example of gravity kept coming up for me because, part of the notion of gravity we can observe and know is truth. Like we know that if we drop something from a height, it's going to fall. Right. So, and then we can even, take the equations and apply it towards that. And the equations will predict how long it takes to fall. Right. And pretty accurately. So there are those truths. But then there's also the part that we've been told by the appeal to authority logic fallacy. Right. Which says, it was always growing up that gravity is a force. Right. Exactly, and that it just things with mass just attract other things. And of course, it was always hard to understand, well, why don't birds come crashing down to the earth then? Why aren't we headed on a collision course with the sun? These kind of questions. But nonetheless, and, now, of course, they have a different story. They say it's a perturbation in the space-time continuum or something like that, or it's a wave. There's all sorts of weird stuff, but we can't observe any of those things. But we accept them, or me and you, we used to accept them as being the truth, right? But once you understand having this discussion about what things are things, you have to go back to the base level, and you can't just have assumptions. Because the scientists in the theoretical physics world, right? One of them has this quote, and it's something to the effect that, if you give me one assumption, I can pretty much prove anything, right? And that's why the Big Bang was so important for theories about the universe, because that's the one assumption, and of course it's a big ridiculous assumption because it says, from nothing came everything. So,
yeah, you're really something that might be pertinent to the current discussion is really the argumentum ad ignorantium fallacy. It's an appeal to ignorance fallacy, and from this you can understand something. It kind of describes the issue a little bit more meticulously. So what you have to hold in mind is that the onus of proof is always on him or her who makes an assertion or proposes a theory. So now you have two people or two fractions of people. One fraction is called the negative in the context of the fallacy, and the other fraction is called the positive. The positive is the one who makes a claim or assertion or proposes a theory. The negative is the one who declines the assertion or claim. But we are talking about a mere assertion still. Nothing has been proven yet. The onus of proof, however, is on the one whom asserts the positive. If something is or did not happen, how can it be proven? Therefore, and this is paramount, therefore the negative always holds the field in logic, which is why critical thinking is paramount. If nothing has been proven, it is simply not wise to just take the assertion at face value. It has to be questioned until it is proven or disproven. So you could look at it like it's not my job to prove the falsehood of my opponent's claim. It is the job of the opponent to prove the truth of his or her own claim. So, people, I could bring something like an example. Picture someone saying that they see a cat. Andy, there is a cat in the corner over there. Can you see it?
No, I can't see it, Alexander.
Well, okay, you assert that there is no cat because you can't see it. Well, I would say I do see it, and you have to believe me. Otherwise, you, Andy, you have to disprove my assertion. Prove to me that the cat isn't there. And this really you can compare this to the issue about viruses. The theory that viruses, quote, viruses cause disease. They say that I must believe them, otherwise prove that viruses don't cause disease.
Right. Or they also say prove what does cause disease. They say until you can prove there's an alternative cause, then viruses must be the cause.
Well, that's something we can explain. But however, they have to, well, from their standpoint, they have to prove that those artifacts can induce severe illness, like polio and AIDS, which have various causes to its inauguration. Simply making the claim that cells break down into, quote, cells break down into millions of particles in a poisoned, rotten tissue sample does not constitute proof that the same would happen in my living system, within my living body. There is a huge difference between in vivo and in vitro.
Absolutely. But I can say that if you put a bunch of poison in your living body, I know what will happen.
Yeah, I know for certain that spraying DDT all over the place and spraying it on children and what have you not will cause paralysis. And, inhaling nitrite inhalants or poppers will cause vascular tumors and lung conditions like PCP and Kaposi sarcoma, which fall under the category of AIDS.
Yeah, and, absolutely.
There is various causes that have been obscured by these logical fallacies plus authoritative biases that really have led people astray in discovering what the true nature of health really is.
So, Alexander, I want to, what you were just saying about, whoever proposes a theory or a hypothesis, right, has the burden of proof, and this can't be shifted, right? But they have to, the negative person, if there is proof, their job is to vet the proof, right, or try to disprove it and see if it holds water. And that leads to the concept from the philosophy of science known as falsifiability, right? That essentially to do in a scientific experiment that's valid, it has to be falsifiable so that person on the negative can come and try to falsify it. And if they're unable to, it stands. And if they are able to, and this is, of course, if there's actually evidence and proof, but then if they can falsify it, then the theory is no longer valid.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
That is very accurate. Yeah, of course. But it's really the foundation of it is the positive. Making the assertion doesn't hold the field, though. It's really, you can't just appeal to their authority, just because they are on the positive. If you are to appeal to someone's authority, rather be it in the negative than the positive, because the positive still has the burden of proof until it is proven or disproven.
That's right.
So it's really not, it's not wise to just appeal to that fraction's authority.
And it doesn't matter if people believe that it's true or not, because it either is true or not in objective reality. And this is, brings me to the topic of, the so-called scientific consensus, because that really is a contradiction in terms. If the science is valid, then it's valid. It has nothing to do with there being a consensus of opinion, right? Because it's not valid based on opinion. It's valid based on, if an objective experiment with an independent variable shows it to be true and can't be debunked, then it's true, period. And it doesn't really, the opinions of individual men and women is irrelevant at that point. They would be wise to accept it once it's the truth of something is established, but some people still may not.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you see this issue of consensus, being used and muddying the water? What advice do you have for people on how to regard this?
Well, you see, it's not really to look at things in terms of, as you've said, the consensus, which I describe as the established truth, the accepted truth. Because then, the truth is what is, and establishing that is the truth is really not the point, because people should care only if it's the truth or not. If you make something as a consensus, people will only look at it as the established truth. So what I'm trying to say is they don't care if it's the truth, they only care if it's established. So really, if it's not established, really it becomes irrelevant. Like now, if the counter arguments are given against the claims of the positive, then like now they have become minified. They have been rendered insignificant by the positive, by means of manipulating people's feelings and emotions.
Right.
This also can be traced down to the appeal to emotion fallacy and the, like the red herring that they always use in politics. But people's feelings are being manipulated and swayed in such a malevolent, if you can say, manner, in a malevolent fashion, that they really the significance of truth as a principle has vanished in the sense of the word.
Right. And there are, strong, centrally organized influences and mechanisms to get people to, appeal to their emotions, for example, right? That's one that, especially fear, is used extensively to get people to believe things that are completely untrue or, have no basis in reality, right? And this is done through the news media, public relations, marketing, compulsory schooling, all of these mechanisms. And some of them are, lifelong, and some of them can be employed anytime they are needed. But I want to point out how if you fall prey or subject to these fallacies and end up believing something that is not really true, it can be very, very dangerous and harmful for your health. And we can look at the healthcare system and many, many other, examples of this, where certain things are well established as being true. And what I'm getting at is that there are two pivotal studies that were done to evaluate the effect of medicine on the population. One of them was in Johns Hopkins, and they found that in the year they studied, and they estimate on an annual basis, that because of medical errors, like people make mistakes, the wrong dose, doing surgery on the wrong side of the body, forgetting something that's really important, all these kinds of things, 250,000 people die each year. And then in addition to that, not from any errors in dosing or anything, but just from taking as directed, about 140,000 people die from pharmaceutical medications. And that was in the Journal of the American Medical Association. So these are two non-overlapping studies. And if you combine the data, then what you determine is that it becomes the third leading cause of death. So now out there, right, but from very well respected academic institutions in the United States, very mainstream, we have the truth here that they've determined that healthcare actually kills more people than pulmonary disease and is now the third leading cause of death, right? And so now this is, a pretty strong truth. And nobody knows it because it hasn't been put out there and emphasized, right, into the general belief system. So people are just completely ignorant to it. And as a result of that, and as a result of all of the marketing and propaganda around our healthcare system telling you how great it is and how important it is, people still go in there and subject themselves to being killed, day in and day out, when there are much better alternatives, and they know nothing about those as well. So by falling prey to these logic fallacies, you can literally put your life at risk. And of course, be manipulated by other interests of third parties for a variety of reasons, for financial gain, for control, etc.
Yeah, what you've just described is basically iatrogenesis, right?
Yes.
It's really, that is a term in and of itself, which is strangely, it is established, yet still, because it has been rendered insignificant in the sense of the word, people don't really pay attention to it because if it's being promulgated by the people who they appeal to, the people who they use appeal to authority fallacy to, that's basically the heart of their
right.
And that really boils down to manipulating feelings, doesn't it, Andy?
Absolutely.
Really, yeah.
And let me just define, iatrogenesis, for anyone who's never heard that term, that's when the disease or harm is actually caused by the medical care itself, right? So I, as a doctor, iatrogenesis. But you're right, because people have this, unearned, really, respect and appeal to authority for doctors. And I saw this firsthand especially when I worked in cancer medicine earlier in my career, because as soon as someone found out they had cancer, many times, not every single time, but more than half the time, they would simply say, "Doctor, don't say any more. Just do what you got to do," right? They would give total trust and authority over their body, to this other person when they don't even know anything about this person.
Yeah. Exactly.
Other than that they have this status, right? And then what I saw for the 2 years that I worked in oncology is every single person pretty much die who got chemotherapy.
Yeah. You can see, really, you've basically addressed the heart of it, the danger of ascribing or trying to delegate your intelligent judgment to another person. And really that delegation has, become your shackle, has become also your ticket to death. Really, it's you can never delegate. Well, it's really an attempt at delegating something, because you can't really delegate it. It's your judgment that is yours to make assessments with. Also another thing you can't delegate is a right. You can't delegate a right to murder. You can't delegate a right to rule over someone else's life. And you can't delegate a right to tell another person what should happen with their body, as has happened in the past couple of years. People thinking that a fraction of people has the right to do harm unto other people, when I myself and you also don't have that right. Yet that's the core of it. It really is do no harm. You're not allowed to do harm, yet the people in special positions are allowed to do harm because that's their right.
Well, Alexander, so of course there's among physicians, in my experience, there was always a lot of discussion about this controversial quote from allegedly it's ascribed to Hippocrates, although there's some disagreement over whether he actually said this. But, it says actually first do no harm, right? So
Yes.
the response by a doctor would be, okay, after we do that first, what do we do second? Right? And second, we cause harm. Because there's nothing else that we know how to do. Right. But, this is, such a key and important issue about having to know, what you're doing, because, this would be the worst possible thing. If you're, people don't go into medicine to harm other people.
Yeah.
Right. They go in there because, now some may go in because they say it's a way to get rich or something, or be prestigious. Right. So I'm not saying that's not part of it, but they also do it because they generally want to do something good. That this is the reason why doctors have so much respect, because they're seen as, they're spending their life helping others, and helping others in a way that people are scared of helping themselves. We've lost the knowledge and the confidence to address our own health issues. So this is, kind of an important thing. And I feel that it puts a great responsibility on the physician to observe the highest level of morality and natural law, because they've been given this, kind of authority and respect, and they should make sure that they're worthy of that, and also make sure to explain to the people that they're working with that it's actually, your life, your decisions, and the consequences of your choices about how you address your health issue. You're going to have to deal with those. And that is why one of my, major philosophies as a natural healing consultant is to be your own health authority.
Now, what you're saying is really being in the medical fields, doesn't constitute, me belaboring kind of the issue of the medical establishment doesn't constitute that everyone within the medical establishment has, intentions that do not that do not serve what they intend to serve. Of course, they all have the heart-based care of actually doing making the world better in the way that they see that can actually contribute to that. But really, it has to. The point that I'm trying to make, and Andy's trying to make as well, is really to not fall prey to thinking that authority equates to truth in the sense of the word.
That's absolutely crucial. And, if you were raised in the compulsory schooling system, it's something that you're going to have to overcome, because I feel that that's one of the major ways that it achieves its indoctrination, is by having us become dependent essentially on getting official knowledge from these authority figures, who are the, respected scientists, the one designated as experts by the government, perhaps, or other types of authority figures, people who are authors of the textbooks that they use, which are somewhat uniform. And that's becoming, of course, more and more centralized through Common Core curriculum and other initiatives where the federal government essentially bribes the states to adopt these standards and compromise their ability to have local and regional variations, in their curriculum and their education style. So I think we're going to wrap up today. Unfortunately, Alexander is unable to get his technical issues worked out in time to continue the discussion, but I think we've really touched quite a number of points today. Talking about the background, understanding the epistemology, how relativism can be applied to truth, epistemology, and lead to a lot of invalid conclusions about what is really true. And we see that the forces who are driving the policies of society are trying to obfuscate this notion that there is real objective truth, and bringing in relativism, reductionism, collectivism. We didn't talk about all of those isms, but they're really all related, and trying to manipulate the culture, toward a system that we really don't want to be a part of, because it gets away from the objective truth and natural law, that is, the absolute truths of nature. So thank you so much for joining. Please do check out Alexander's YouTube channel, Realization. We'll have a link in the show notes below. And please do sign up for my newsletter so that you can be apprised of all my upcoming events, of which there are at least one a month, and a lot of exciting things coming up in the fall of 2022. So thank you again, and I'll see you next time.
This is all about fear. And if people were not afraid, you would see this disappear literally overnight.
There is no existence of a virus, and unfortunately you need a child to be able to point to the emperor and say he's got no clothes on.
Once we can understand that it's a model that is bankrupt, that's built on fraud and misinterpretation, then we can liberate ourselves from it and move towards something much more truthful.
Did you know that 99% of your molecules are water? That's why the quality of the water you drink determines the quality of your life. Analemma is an architect of water in your body. It creates a liquid crystalline structure in the water you drink. So it creates coherence inside your body and mind. Coherence unleashes the body's own natural rejuvenating power. It revives, realigns, and regenerates you. Analemma, the architect of life.
Introducing a powerful dietary supplement, over 1 million years in development. A highly concentrated, complex natural formula, rich in trace minerals as well as fulvic and humic acids. Mother Nature's ancient elixir for energy, revitalization, and long life. Shilajit Mumio means conqueror of mountains, destroyer of weakness. Take in the nutritional wisdom of the ancient past. Unleash the vibrant, healthy being inside. Become the conqueror.